Hi, this is Dr. Jose Saldivar with another episode of the Way to College podcast. One of I say this all the time at the beginning of every podcast, right? One of the great things is how the network of folks that I've had on the podcast has just grown. It is something that I cherish, something I think the opportunity and sort of the specialness of it is not lost on me. I am I don't know what it is. I love connecting with people. I love talking to people and hearing people's stories. And so years ago, my students asked me if I could do anything, if I could have any job, what would it be? I said, I would love to just sit with people and have coffee. And I just want to hear their stories. I just want to talk to them and hear their stories. I've been
Yeah.
fascinated by that. And so today that network continues to grow. I'm excited to get into today's story, my guest story. This is our first time talking. This is our first time meeting. And so I'm eager to hear his story. Um, Jose, would you do me the honor and introduce yourself to our listeners out there?
Yeah, sure, of course. And thank you, Tocayo, for the invitation to come and talk with you. And I think it's incredible, right? This journey, the kind of humanistic endeavor here to reach out to folks like me and do this story and podcast about story, ¿verdad? So I'm grateful to you. My name, like yours, is Jose, but I'm Jose Navarro, and I am the department chair at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, which is one of the California State Universities in San Luis Obispo on the Central Coast. Department chair of Ethnic Studies. I'm also the vice chair of the Academic Senate. And for now, I think that's the basics of it.
That sounds like plenty. Coming from academia, right? Yeah, I mean, that's a lot. It's a mouthful.
Yeah, yeah.
Jose, with all of my guests, I always ask if you had to identify a starting point for your educational journey, what would that starting point be?
Boom. Caray. Um, I feel like you're asking me to think back a long ways now.
Just a bit.
Well, um, you know, I know the answer distinctly, uh, Jose, and that's that there's two kind of sparks or starting points for my educational journey, especially in the pursuit of literature in my field. And the first one um, had to be when my uncle. So I'll tell you a bit more about myself, but I was an only child growing up, and my father abandoned me when I was a kid. My mother always in and out of prison and on drugs, so I didn't have a mother or a father. So my grandmother raised me in the housing projects in East LA, in the Ramona Gardens housing projects, which, if you know the area, pretty tough. Um, and so, because my grandmother raised me, I grew up with my uncles and my aunt as sort of siblings, right? Um, and so early on, this had to be late 80s, maybe early 90s. Um, I think it was early 90s. I was probably between 10th and 11th grade. And one of my uncles had gotten out of Folsom State Prison. Back when Folsom State Prison, there was only one. It was a level four institution. And if you went there, it was pretty serious. So he had gotten out of prison and he had started to try to turn his life around. And he was working at our local rec center with a nonprofit who had hired him because the rec center was tough, right? It was drug dealing going in and out of the rec center, that kind of thing. So they hired him to try to help it make a safer space for kids to go and just play basketball and hang out. And he started to do some of that work. And it was that moment where he and I were talking on the steps of the rec center, the entrance to it, and we were talking about my cousin Noah, who I believe you interviewed, and he said, "Well, look how great Noah's doing. What's wrong with you? Why are you, such a troublemaker?" And I said, "Well, you know, and we know as parents, now I'm a parent now, not fair to compare, right? But my attitude at the time was, well, you know, I don't care what Noah does. What's that got to do with me, right? I mean, that's Noah, and that was sort of because I felt hurt that he was comparing. No offense to my cousin, I love him very much, but that was my reaction because I was being compared, right? And so my uncle says, and gang member, but ex-convict, that kind of thing. He asked me this, and I said, well, look, school's not hard. Academically, intellectual, school's not hard. It's boring for me. I can do all the things that he does and more. And he says, oh yeah? And I said, yeah. And he says, well, I'll put $100 in. And 1991, $100 was a lot. It meant, you can buy some Jordans, right? Um, and so I said, okay. And he says, well, I ain't no fool. I'm gonna put $100 if you bring me straight A's, but it has to be a final report card because I ain't no fool, right? I know the progress report. And he says, if you bring me straight A's on a final report card, I will give you $100. So I looked at him. I said, boy, you just lost your money. And he said, okay, we'll see. And it was that bad. I went back to school. I said, okay, let me take this serious. This is $100 writing on this. And I applied myself. And there was still trouble coming. I had to navigate all of that as a young man of color in an educational setting in East LA. But I took his $100. And so that was one of the sort of starting points for me, right? It was this kind of challenge. Um, and the other moment is, as an undergrad, when I started, at Berkeley in the English department, it was tough, never having traveled really out of East LA, never knowing those institutions, and navigating an academic institution like that. Even when I did get there, I struggled. It was, I felt out of place. Things weren't for me. First year, they're forcing me to study, Chaucer and read it in the Middle English, and I'm just like, man, I mean, like there are more important things going on. Like, why is this important? And it was the summer between my first and second year when I came back home that one of my other friends had just gotten out of prison. I feel like here's a running theme, right? But one of my other friends had just gotten out of prison, and he had this book with him, you know, and he's coming out of prison, still white shirt, military press, the whole thing. He says, "Hey, bro, what's happening? What's happening?" We start catching up, and he says, "I hear you're in college now. What are you doing?" I said, "I'm in college. I'm studying literature, but really, man, I want to go to law school so I can help people out. But, we're all getting in trouble with the law, right? Let's think about how I can do this." And he says, "Well, I just finished this good book that I brought out the joint with me. So he says, here you go." And he hands me this book. And the book is Oscar Zeta Acosta's The Revolt of the Cockroach People, you know? And so I was like, all right, you say this is a good book. He said, that's a good book, man. You would like it. And so that was my first ever like real Chicano literature text was Revolt of the Cockroach People by Zeta. And so I read it and I said, oh, dang, this is really cool, right? Really interesting. There's lots of sexism in the book and all that kind of stuff. But I was like, wow, here's a book that's reflecting our experience in the movement, being in East LA, grappling with identity, Chicano masculinity, all that kind of stuff. And then light bulb went off. And so those are the two moments I think for me that set me off on this trajectory.
I'll say I love that. I love those two stories. And one, I love that I had a feeling it was gonna be, I thought it was gonna be a setup. I just had this, I just had this feeling. Yeah, yeah, I just knew it. I said, I know what he's gonna say. I know what he's gonna say. I don't know why,
Yeah.
but I knew it. You so you kind of give us these bookends, right? The moment when your uncle makes that bet with you and you're like, you lost, right? You just lost $100. And you talk about that first year in Berkeley. I know a lot's got to happen in between,
Sure.
right? Because I mean, it's one thing to say, I'm going to do well this semester, I'm going to do well this year, I'm going to get those straight A's. I know I can do it. I know it's easy. And then to find yourself, at one of the best public institutions in the country, like it almost feels like, and please clarify, but it almost feels like, man, there's a switch that goes on that all of a sudden, like there's currency, right, in Berkeley.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
and so what happened? The uncle makes that bet, loses that bet, obviously. What happens in between that leads you to Berkeley?
Yeah. Well, as I said, those, as you noted, those are kind of pivotal moments. And literally it's a pivot, right? It's a shift and a change. But these things start, earlier. So the moment he catches me in the summer between 10th and 11th grade, um, eh, you when you grow up in the housing projects the way we did, especially in the 80s in East LA in the housing projects, I mean, we're talking about, you know, um, the Ramona Gardens housing projects in the 80s and early 90s was the home base for the Mexican mafia. All my family was gang involved. My grandmother was gang involved. My grandfather was gang involved. So really, we're talking generations of gang members here, drug addicts. As I said, my mom was in and out of prison my entire life, so rather absent. Um, and so I didn't know it at the time, but a lot of for me and my friends, especially the young boys in the neighborhood, we had to grapple with a lot of these things and didn't have the language and the words and the discourse about trauma and the discourse about healing and all those kinds of things to really express what we were going through and articulate frustration. So we acted out, right? We acted out in class, and we got into fights, we got into all those kinds of things. And for someone like me who came from a family of generational gang members, that's the other curriculum, right? That's the other thing you're taught, whether consciously or unconsciously, because every time one of my uncles or my own mother got out of prison, they came home, we sat around the table, we ate, and they talked about what it was like in prison. They talked about, stealing food from the mess hall. They talked about, violence in the child line, and how you're supposed to react and not react. So all of it was a kind of training, right? And those are the kinds of things I was learning. And to just synthesize it for you, when I was a kid hitting junior high school, which is when a lot of gang membership and activity happens, right? Um, I knew the names of more state prisons in California than any other state university or state institution, right? I mean, I knew where they were, Ironwood, Blythe, Folsom, Pelican Bay, and even some of the insider sort of things, right? The short corridor in Pelican Bay. I understood the county jail and, high power and what level that was and who went there. And those were the guys you wanted to be like, those were the most powerful. They were what I mean? And so I was well on my way toward that life and that trajectory. Um, And so in the eighth grade, in middle school, at the time it was called junior high school, I got kicked out of junior high school. Sorry, in the ninth grade. Junior high school at the time in East LA went seventh to ninth grade. And there were some high schools that went
Mhm.
ninth through 12. So in that ninth grade, I got kicked out of junior high school for getting into 3 fights in 2 weeks. And because I'm a shorter guy, I'm a little guy, people, they used to think, hey, we'll pick on this dude and no, man, I grew up in the projects, right? I mean, you're going to pick on me, we're going to get in a fight, and you might beat me up, but we're going to get into a fight again and repeat and rinse, right? Because I'm from the projects. I'm not going to run from anyone, right? And it's sort of the way you're trained to survive the housing project and survive that kind of life. So ninth grade, I get kicked out, and they sent me to this high school, Lincoln High School, which is, later I'm off at Berkeley and I learned Lincoln High School is one of the centers of the like civil rights, Chicano civil rights education movements, right? Sal Castro and all that. And I'm like, man, I was there. What are you talking? So I get
Yeah.
kicked out and I go to Lincoln High School. And I spent a year, maybe a year and a half, because I get kicked out in the middle of the year, ninth grade. So I complete ninth grade and then I complete 10th grade. At the end of 10th grade, I get kicked out of Lincoln High School. And the school district's designation for someone like me, a student like me, was they called me an opportunity transfer. I was an OT, is what you're called, right? Opportunity transfer. And that's euphemism for this is your last chance before we kick you out of the entire school district because you're a bad kid. And
Wow.
for the LA Unified to designate a kid like that, right? It's a big city place, big city school district. For them, you got to be a pretty bad kid for them to go, we're giving up on you. This is your last opportunity. Um, so that was that summer I met the made the bet with my uncle. And interestingly enough, my cousin Noah came up because Noah that year graduated as valedictorian of Wilson High School, which is the other East LA school. Um, and so I'm sitting there, right? Opportunity transfer, that kind of thing. And Noah, because he's kind and a good cousin, star student at Wilson High School. He says, "Look, let's get you into Wilson High School with my brother, his brother Ben, who's my age." Um, and he says, let's get you there. I know the principal. I can go talk to the principal. So me and my grandmother and Noah, we go have this meeting with the principal at Wilson High School, and and plops my file down on the principal's desk. He says, "Look, Ramon, this is my cousin. I know the file says he's in trouble and he's, opportunity trying, but give him a chance. He promises to do good, promises not to, get into fights, not to cause you trouble." And the principal, Ramon, he looks at me and says, "Jose, you promise?" I'm like, "Look, man, I promise." I said, "I promise that I will not go looking for trouble. But if someone comes and tries to beat me up, I'm going to defend myself. I'll respond,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
But I won't start it." And he looks at me, man. And you could tell this principal's thinking chinga, right? I mean, this kid, like, and and I'm being honest with him, and I'm like,
Yeah.
"Look, I'll be honest with you. I'm not gonna come start trouble, but if someone picks on me, hey, you got the wrong dude." And he sort of hems and haws, and Noah's like, "Oh, please, come on, Ramon, please." He looks, and right here's his valedictorian star kid off to Stanford, and here's this bad kid. So rock hard place, right?
Yeah.
And so he does. He finally says, "Okay, Jose, I'm gonna let you in this school, but you gotta behave." And I said, "Look, I'm gonna behave, right? I won't start trouble, I promise you. So if I'm in your office, it ain't my fault." And
Yeah.
so he relents. And that's the summer we make that bet. Um, all this to say, in terms of the in between, that bet and Berkeley is Noah and my uncle making his bed, Noah helping me out, talk to the friends to get me into this new school. Because otherwise I would have been at what's called a skill center in East LA, and that's just training ground for state prison, right? You're on your way, um, and so those kind of factors set me on this path. Um, and then part of that promise, of course, Noah's dad is a minister. So part of the deal with getting me into the school, Noah said, "Well, you got to go to church with my mom and dad now." And I was like, "Okay, you know." So I did, man. I mean, I was like, "This is the deal, right?" I mean, here we were wheeling and dealing in the hood, right? Always,
Yeah.
So these were the deals, and so I had to commit, and so I did, and I turned it around.
Yeah.
Um, I turned it around, committed academically, and I still had fights in between,
Yeah.
but they happened privately, either off campus or in the bathroom, and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of discipline to, when someone runs up on you and they're like, "What's up?" To be able to say, "You know what? Not right now. I'm gonna walk away." Because if you walk away, "Oh, you're a chump, or you're weak, you're whatever, you're a punk," and all that kind of stuff. And in the hood, once someone comes and they challenge you or they beat you up, they're always going to come and try to take advantage of you. So that's always the risk. So it was hard. I will not say it was easy. It was very difficult. You have to stay really disciplined.
Yeah.
But once I committed to that and committed to academic life, the other positive thing was all the homeboys in the neighborhood. Once I proved to them that I was, you know, going to be academically successful, they supported me because they knew my family. It wasn't a question of whether I was a punk or a nerd, or it wasn't a question of that. They, like, we know he's down. We know he'll fight you, right? But he's on this different path. And because our neighborhood was so established as one of the original gang neighborhoods in East LA, you had a lot of older homeboys who came out and said, "Hey, leave him alone." And my family had been there for 60 plus years. So
Yeah.
we had a lot of sort of juice. And so if they said, and my uncles, if they said, "Hey, leave him alone," you left me alone. Because if not, you not only had to fight me, but you had to fight my uncles and everybody else who were coming out of prison. And, you know, so I had the benefit of that as well. And so in between, junior high school and these bets and watching plenty of my friends die and get shot on the street, and ultimately saying, "Hey, man, I don't want to end up like that." In between that was that kind of thing. I had some teachers help me One teacher in particular, this white dude named Craig Mitchell, who became a judge in LA, the LA County Superior Court judge right now. He helped me out as well, and went through the application process, turned things around, A's, AP courses, and even that was the school was a challenge too, right? Because I had that file. So I'd go to my school counselor and she's trying to stick me in automotive technology, and I said, no, 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 no. I want what my cousin Ben has, right? Because his cousin went to Stanford. Just stick me in algebra and, algebra two and whatever it is. And she's like, Jose, have you seen your file? We can't put you in that class. And I'm like, no, 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 right? And all I know in my training then is just the hood, right? And so when I went in the first day to set my schedule, I jammed up this kid coming out, this Asian kid coming out of the advising in the library. And I said, hey, come here. Let me see your program. Let me see your card. What classes you got? He's like, what? Give me that. And I took his card, and I go to the college counselor there, the academic counselor. And I said, hey, you see this? I want these classes. Give me what he's got. I just, I can't do that. You look at your file. You can't, of course, it's going to be a running theme. But I said, Miss Nino, I'll tell you what, let's make a deal. You stick me in these classes, honors, bio, English, all this, stick me in these classes. And if the first 5-week progress report, if I'm not passing these classes, you can stick me anywhere you want. PE, put me in the bungalow, put me wherever you want. Just let's make a deal. She says, oh, sir, I don't know if I could do that, And I said, okay, you see my file? Said, yeah. I said, you see what it says about my family and my grandmother? Yeah. I said, don't make me call my grandmother here. And she says, okay, please don't call your grandmother. Okay, we're going to try this out.
Yeah.
And I ended up in the college track now, right? I ended up in the college courses. And I proved I could do it. I proved my mettle. And so that happens between, those bets, that kind of thing, and Berkeley. Turned my grades around, and I only applied to Berkeley because of Craig Mitchell. Takes me out to dinner. He becomes an assistant district attorney. He says, where are you applying to school? And I said, well, I'm applying to Cal State LA, and I'm applying to here. And he says, well, why aren't you applying to Berkeley? I said, well, the college counselor said I would never get in. And like a good, lawyer, Socratic method. He says, is she on the admissions committee at Berkeley? And I said, no. And he says, then why are you letting her make an admissions decision for you? And he says, check the goddamn box. And I said, okay. Check the box, and how it goes. You get the admission letter, the big fat packet, and into Berkeley. So there's a lot there, Jose, but that's kind of how it happened.
You talk about themes, the recurring themes in your own life. A friend asked, right, you've interviewed all of these people, are there themes? And I said, yeah, there's this profound theme of at some point guests take ownership of their education. And it's them, it might be a family member, but they just like, I'm going to make some decisions about my education. And so that's really powerful. You have your family that kind of intervenes and helps you out, but then to go and to take the classes and say, I want these classes, right? And here we're going to negotiate, right? If I don't make it, you can stick me wherever you want. But I think of countless kids who find themselves maybe not in your exact situation, but a similar situation where they've got a record, they've got a history, and the school immediately, I'm going to make some decisions for this kid. And we're not going to have a conversation about what this kid is capable of or really wants, but we're just going to make some decisions for them. And so, man, thank you for that story. Thank you for sharing that. That's really powerful, man.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, also. Ownership is the big thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. But and desire is another thing, right? And there's a huge gap there. Because and I teach Latino studies, and one of the things that we know is it's greater than 85% of Latino parents who want their kids to go to college. The difference, we call it the cultural capital difference, is that many of them don't know the tools and the requirements and the exact pathway to get there.
Yeah.
And some of these are structural issues built into school districts that track their students, even though we say we don't track anymore. We do, and that's the decision
Oh yeah.
making process, right? So if you don't have gumption, if you don't have a grandmother who will beat up a school counselor, you're gonna be tough, right? It's gonna be,
Yeah.
it will be
Yeah.
difficult. Yeah, and we set these kids on those pathways and make decisions for them. But absolutely right, and that's the pattern. And you're raising a good kind of insight here, and you're highlighting a need, and that's the need for an advocate for our kids, right? To say, I
Yeah.
know the pathway. You gotta be in algebra one in eighth grade, or you're going to be behind in the California system with A through G university requirements. Right? But who knows that,
Yeah.
man? Other than people
Yeah.
like us.
Yeah. And I appreciate you saying that, right? Naming it, right? Giving somebody like there needs to be an advocate. I was doing a talk at college essays, group of Gear Up students a couple of weeks ago. And I told I told every group that I saw, it was like three different sessions. It was, the kids were great, kids were asking great questions, but I told the adults in the room, their facilitators, I said, look, it's great that you bring them. Uh, I said, but you all play an important role because they need advocates, right? And it's not just bringing them here, but it's also having conversations with their parents and telling their parents about what needs to be happening and about critical information. And so I was like, this isn't just a free trip for you guys. Like, you all playing a really important role for these kids. You need to be that advocate. And so I appreciate you, calling it what it is. Thank you. You you talk about Berkeley, and that was that other critical moment, right? And reconnecting with your friend, getting that book. Tell us about after. So you have that moment, you read this book. What was the rest of your time at Berkeley like?
Yeah. You know, it was a tough transition. I remember my first year at Berkeley in the dorms, I couldn't sleep because it was too quiet.
Wow.
And Berkeley, you're in the dorms. It's a city, right? City environment. It's not Stanford. We don't have the mile long kind of lawn way and separation from East Palo Alto, the other side of the freeway. At Berkeley, it's an urban environment. But even at Berkeley at night, after a certain hour, it's really, really quiet. Students are not running around shouting, screaming, that kind of thing. And so I couldn't sleep because I didn't hear the freeway noise, I didn't hear the helicopter, the police, I didn't hear those kinds of things, the big city noise and the ghetto bird, as we used to call it, right? So because I couldn't hear that, let's call it brown noise. We won't even call it white noise, right? Because, LA neighborhood is a Chicano neighborhood, because I
Yeah.
didn't hear that brown noise of the helicopter, it would keep me up. I'd be like, man, it's too quiet. Like, what's going on? Like, something's going to happen. Like, what's happening? Like, and so I distinctly remember some of that, and then you just get used to the quiet after. Like, oh, everything's cool. I can go to sleep. Um, but there was a lot of kind of culture shock and catching up at Berkeley too in the English department. I mean, I remember writing a paper once for first year writing, and I remember getting this feedback from one of the grad students. That Berkeley was number one English department in the country at the time, right? Probably still is, I think. Um, but this white graduate student instructor who was grading my paper, I remember he puts a comment in the margins. This is a bit melodramatic, right? Because I'm writing this paper about someone getting shot and whatever and that kind of thing, and whatever. This is melodramatic. I go to him and I say, hey, excuse me, what do you mean this is melodramatic? Oh, this is a lot of drama. I mean, really? And I'm like, no, man, that really happened. And he's like, oh, well, it's still rather melodramatic. And I'm like, man, give me my, whatever,
Wow.
and there were those kinds of things. So you encounter some of that, And quite honestly, when I went there, I had no sense of the institution, what Berkeley meant even. I mean, I took classes with fantastic faculty members, Jose Saldívar um, and Laura Perez and, all these amazing, Stephen Best and Greenblatt and all these other like, you know, and so people are walking around and they're like, oh my God. And I'm like, I mean, these old dudes can't beat my ass, I mean, I don't care,
Yeah.
And and the other difficulty was there I am in this institution, an incredibly brilliant, wonderful institution, and I'm still calling home, and friends are getting locked up, and they're getting shot, and they're getting, all this kind of stuff, and um, so I had to constantly balance sort of the work I was doing at Berkeley, going, I'm going to read this book in the Middle English, Canterbury Tales or whatever it is. And my life now is to sit there in a library and read this. Meanwhile, things are happening in real life to folks at home.
Yeah.
And, the other challenge, of course, is that my mother and my family, my grandmother, sorry, who I called my mother, they didn't have the money to come visit me. They didn't have a car to come visit me. She was too old at the time, too sick at the time. My uncles and aunts, they were, on drugs. They were doing other things. So I didn't have family support while I was over there. Um and so it created really difficult conditions for me because family weekend, you're in the dorms and you see families come over and, oh, Johnny, let's go out to dinner. Oh, is that your roommate? Invite your roommate to dinner, right? And you see mom and dad come over and all that kind of stuff. And you're watching, I'm sitting there in the dorm watching all these parents and families. Oh, let me see your room, little Johnny. And oh, let's go out and we'll take, what do you need? And let's make a run to Target. And I got nobody. I got my Mexican blanket, with a tiger on it. This is, one of those colchas,
Yeah.
I'm sitting in my room and I'm, family weekend. I'm like, I know they can't come. And my grandmother, because we grew up on welfare, she had $800 a month to her name to pay rent, pay the bills, all that kind of stuff. At the time, it was still 15, 20 cents a minute to make a long distance phone call. And I couldn't
Wow.
put that economic burden on her, right? So I had to
Yeah.
assume it, but I didn't have no
Yeah.
money. I was, a poor undergrad student, Pell Grant student. And um, so even those first years at Berkeley as an undergrad were incredibly, incredibly difficult in that kind of way. So my second year, I got put on academic probation and I had to take a semester off. And, I did. So I went back, did community college for, one semester in the summer and then came back my third year at Berkeley. Um, and when I came back my third year at Berkeley, because I took that time off, there was a delay in my financial aid because they were processing my return. So I come back fall semester, my third year at Berkeley. And now we have terms for this, right? Now we know what this is called. But I was effectively a homeless student. I was
Wow.
housing insecure, as they call it, right?
Yeah.
Housing insecure. And I couldn't go back home and tell my mom, hey, I need, $2,000 to put a down payment or put a deposit and whatever and rent a room. And there was nobody. I couldn't do that. And so I was couch surfing for the first part of that fall semester. Um, and then, one of my friends said, hey, one of our roommates, he's breaking his lease. Can you take over? Do you need a place to stay? And I'm like, yes, I can, but my financial aid hasn't come in. Can you wait for me to pay you? And they said, yeah, sure. We can wait for you. And so then I secured housing.
Yeah.
Um, but for those first 4 or 5 weeks of that fall semester, um, I think I had $25 to my name. And so while I was coming back to school doing that kind of stuff, I went out and I bought me a loaf of bread every week and some peanut butter and jelly. And I ate peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for breakfast and for lunch. And for dinner during that semester, to change things up, I would walk down to this Chinese restaurant and for $1.25, they would give me a small thing of rice and put teriyaki sauce. And the teriyaki sauce was 25 cents, right? So it's $1 plus 25 for the teriyaki sauce.
Yeah.
So if you want a little spice on your rice, you gotta fork it over, man. And so every day, that's what I ate: water, peanut butter and jelly, and rice and teriyaki sauce until my financial aid came through. So I was a homeless student, housing insecure, food insecure. And now, as a professor, we have those words. We know how to deal, we know how to make these interventions. But back then, nothing. And I
We'll
had
say,
no other resource to turn to for money or
yeah,
for any support. But that was my
you,
best semester
that was your
academically.
best semester academically. We'll say you struggled, right?
Hmm.
Maybe not academically, right? But you've got all of these other forces, these other things happening to you at any point. But you and I teach, you and I work with students every day. Um, and I've seen students walk away, because they find themselves in the midst of struggle. At any point, did you stop and just say, am I really supposed to be here? Or maybe I need to go back home. Did those thoughts ever get into
Yeah,
your head?
many times. Yeah, many times. Many,
And
many times.
what kept you? What kept you focused? And
Um, well, I'll tell you, a couple of times, and I think this is the case with many young Latino men in college. The economic pressure that you feel, right? Because at that point you're a young man and you think, here's my family going through poverty, right? And I can just drop this place right now, go work, and at least make an immediate impact with it, right? You just feel the pressure to do something to alleviate the economic pressure. And one of the things that I had considered was joining the military, right? I was like, you know what? F this place, forget about it. I could go join the military, and I was going to join the Marine Corps. Because I had an uncle, in the Marines. He went to Vietnam, and the whole family, loved him. He was a war hero, that kind of thing. But I also knew that he was suffering trauma from the war as well, right? So it's not all glory and this kind of thing. I saw him suffer that trauma and medicate, with different things. And so I said, well, maybe not. But I was there, right? I was there, kind of at the line, at the breaking point. And that was one real concrete way. And there were other kind of moments where I'm like, that's it, I'm quitting, I'm done. Um, but there were a group of friends, other men of color, from East LA, from Salinas, from rural towns, from other places, who just kind of encouraged, and they were like, let's do this. We're in this together. And so I got to give them credit for creating community in that kind of way, and helping me sort of see the process through. The other moment was this one professor that I had named Colleen Lai, Asian American professor, new professor at Berkeley. And um, this was like third year, maybe middle of third year. I take her class, and she has this class on post colonial theory and literature. And I read this book called Black Skin, White Mask by Frantz Fanon. And the book begins with a chapter on language, Black folks and language, and studying language and that kind of thing. And Fanon makes the argument and does this assessment. And he says, look, when it comes to the colonized and the colonizer, right?
Mhm.
Um, he says, when you have a colonial force, uh, people of color, the colonized, their the recognition of their humanity is going to rise insofar as they can reproduce the language, the mores, this of the colonizer, right? And what this translates to is for Black folks, for brown folks, for racialized people, um, we're going to seem more and more intelligent and more legitimate the better our English is, the better we sound like white folks, right? If we can articulate that. And I said, well, and what he concludes, Fanon, in this chapter is that the mastery of language, he says, and this is a direct quote, that the mastery of language affords remarkable power. The power to assume a culture, to assume an identity, or at least to reproduce it. And I said, African, this is what I'm doing, right? If I can master their language, if I can be excellent in this kind of way, maybe I can change them. And then you learn about code switching, right? So the way you and I talk right now as educated, Chicano men, Well, that's different than the way I might talk if I go back to the hood and run into some friends, man. Hey, dog, what's up? I mean, I don't walk around the university greeting my colleagues going, hey, dog, what's happening? Give me some daps, right? I don't, I just don't do that,
Yeah.
right? I don't do that. Is it, me faking the funk, as we used to say, or no? This is me understanding that we code switch, and depending on where we are and who we're talking to, we speak or don't speak in a particular way. It's linguistic community. So when I learned that, I was like, oh, I see value now in studying literature and language in this kind of way. I can see the code switch. What it means for Latinos in particular is that if we can code switch, especially if we're bilingual, trilingual, even if we speak calon, orale, guachale, trucha, you know, get down hometown, all those kinds of code switches.
Yeah.
There's a powerfulness in that, right? What it means is I can do what you can do, but you can't do what I can do. And I can move between this community and this community, this academic community and this community in the barrio, and even, do the Valley Girl Chicana. Like, here we go, Dad, right? I mean, even that, right?
Yeah.
That's how cool we are, and that's how cool
Yeah.
we are. And so when I learned that language was powerful in that kind of way, and that we can do this, we can, you go, oh, I see this as a tool now for success. And
Yeah.
it then for me, the light bulb went on. I'm like, this is in fact useful, right? I can study literature to this end, to this useful end. And I took it to its end. Um, and I became a teacher after Berkeley. I volunteered teaching in San Quentin State Prison for 6 months. And then I taught in East Oakland as a high school teacher with a bunch of kids coming out of juvenile hall. Um, and then ultimately I decided, I needed more. I'm an intellectual. I need to be challenged. And then I went to do a master's degree in English at San Francisco State. And then I applied to a PhD program. I applied to Berkeley, Stanford, and USC, the only three PhD programs I applied to. And I talked to Paula Moya when I got sort of waitlisted at Stanford, right? They only admitted, I think, three people to their modern thought program that year. And she was like, Jose, you're like number four, like you're compelling. But and I was like, oh, come on, let's make a deal. And she was like, we don't make deals like that. And so that was the only deal I never made. But I ended up going to USC studying with a bunch of incredible scholars who also helped me and took me under their wing. Chief of which, actually, uh, there were, and I got to give them credit. It was David Lloyd, who's now at UC Riverside, John Carlos Rowe, who's still at USC, and Teresa McKenna was my advisor, was the first Chicana to ever chair an English department in the country, whose husband is Jose Limon now. So I'm sure you know who these people are, but anyone listening to your podcast, these are pretty big deals. These are cool people.
And I was going to ask what happened, what came after Berkeley, because before connecting with that friend, right, between freshman year, second year, and getting the SETA book, you were talking about becoming a lawyer. And clearly the book had a profound impact on you, right? You're studying literature. And my question is, was there still that impetus for you to help your community in some way?
Yeah, that was my entire motivation for wanting to become a lawyer, right? You know, I think anyone who grows up outside of the hood and outside of those particular areas where you call it the ghetto, the hood, the barrio, um, for those people, I think there's this kind of normative storytelling, normative discourse about the good guys and the bad guys, right? And for them, Officer Jones is the next door neighbor who coaches T-ball, and you play with, his kid T-ball, and Officer Jones, and he's great and he's helpful and he's whatever. Well, when Officer Jones is at work policing us in the hood, right, the assumption is we're little troublemakers. You're little black and brown troublemakers running around the hood, And if you haven't done something yet and you're innocent right now, well, it's just a matter of time. So I'm going to police you right now because eventually you're going to do something wrong, right? There's in the hood barrio context, especially for young black and brown boys, there is an assumption of innate criminality because they're little black boys and little brown boys in those neighborhoods. So someone might look at you, Jose, in those contexts and go, and you're like, hey man, I'm trying to go to school. And yeah, right, trying to go to school. What do you learn? How to steal a car, right? Those kinds of things. And and even with now Latino and black officers, I think the challenge for them is to distinguish them as brown men from other brown men, right? Oh, look at me. I'm not like that criminal. And then therefore the policing that happens of black and brown kids and those even by black and brown officers is they now have to tell the world, well, I'm black and I'm brown, but I'm not a criminal like them, right? And so in their policing, I think some of that subconsciously comes out, right? Um, and so I tell you this because um, my impetus to become a lawyer was to help those kids, my friends included and me included, right? I've seen some things happen that were illegal, just plainly illegal. I'm talking, LAPD going and picking up some kid from another neighborhood, and because that kid mouthed off to the officer, they got him in the back of the car, drive him into our neighborhood. Mind you, this was pre kind of, cameras and phone cameras and that kind of stuff. They would drive them 9 o'clock at night into the housing projects, get on their bullhorn and go, hey, we got this kid from this rival neighborhood who says all you guys from this neighborhood are a bunch of chumps and they're going to walk right through your neighborhood. So we're going to let them out. They let that kid out. Neighborhood close their doors and they take off. Right. So now you got kidnapping. Now you got, you're an accomplice to assault, attempted murder, right? Because whatever violence the guys in the neighborhood perpetrate against that kid, the cops have helped, right? And so I saw things like that. And I'm not saying these guys in the neighborhood, all my friends, son santitos, right? I'm not saying they're angels and they never did anything wrong.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that either. But because I saw so much of that going on, it blurred the lines of who was actually the good guy and who was the bad guy. And I didn't believe that. But I did firmly believe that if I went to law school and studied the law, at least we could defend people. At least we could force people to play by the rules or by the law in some way, shape, or form. And that was my impulse. My impulse was to get an English degree, go study the law, become a lawyer, and help in this kind of way and work toward justice, right? My own sense of justice. When the time came, though, law school was $50,000 a year, 3 years, it's 150 grand. I could do the
Yeah.
math. And I was like, I am not taking $150,000 in student loans. So I became a teacher and tried to help that one.
At the beginning, you told us about your titles, your roles. Tell us about the work that you do now, Jose.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. When I first got the job as an assistant professor at Cal Poly, I got the job in the English department. Ironically, right? I was complaining about Chaucer, and there I am in an English department. But as you know, when you go on the academic job market, you go mostly where you get the job.
Yeah.
And so I, landed a job here at Cal Poly in the English department, and I came here. And San Luis Obispo, when I got here, it's still incredibly white and moneyed, right? Um, like 85% of the city is white, 15% Latino, and less than 1% everything else. And even though Cal Poly San Luis Obispo is a California State University as part of the CSU, right? It was the student body here was the wealthiest and the whitest student body of any public university in the state of California.
Wow.
It still is,
Yeah.
right?
Wow.
And so I came here and I was like, when I got here, we moved from LA up here. And I looked around, I was like, damn, where did all the people of color go, right? I mean, I thought I was, it was strange, man. I mean, if you ever seen the movie Pleasantville, right?
Yeah.
It felt like Pleasantville. Everyone
Oh,
was
wow.
happy here. It was, Father knows best. Leave it to Beaver. And I was like, yeah, man, but where are the good tacos? Like, where? And they were like, no, 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 Jose, you got to go 30 miles south to Santa Maria to get there. I'm like, 30 miles is a long way to drive, man, for tacos. Like, but that's kind of
Wow.
what it was. And so, from the first time I got here, and even coming here as one of the few Latino professors, there are more now. We push for some change. Um, when I first got here, a lot of that stuff landed on me, and the few of us that were here. So we had, when I first got here, what's called the blackface incident at Cal Poly. 4 years before I got here, these ag students, because we're a big ag school too and an engineering school, these ag students decide to throw a party here at Cal Poly. And when they throw this party on campus, in university housing, in this house they're allowed to live in because they take care of the animals, these ag kids decide to paint a Confederate flag on their porch, hang a noose, and put up a sign that say that has a gay slur on it and a racial slur that says no F word or no N words allowed in this party. And then I'm here, and then these frat kids, while I'm here, first couple of years here, decide they're gonna throw basically their equivalent of a Compton cookout and paint their faces black and act black and whatever they imagine acting black is, and they do that. And then they do another party called Colonial Bros and Navajos, where these white kids are going to go act out their fantasies of conquest and rape and murder of Native women. And they're going to conquer them. And I'm like, so every one of these incidents come up, and even in English, I'm like, this is not good. So we talk to the president, we talk to students of color. Students of color are coming to me, and so whether I wanted to or not, I had to do that additional work in addition to publishing, research, writing, presentations, all that kind of stuff, and teaching my classes. I had to do the work of addressing those issues of race and racism, and sexual assault and gender. Um, and then my colleagues at the time in the English department, there were about 50 to 60 people teaching for the English department at Cal Poly at the time, 2012. Of about 60 of them, this is tenure track faculty and lecturers. I was one of two non-white faculty members. There was a Black woman and me. And
Wow.
so, going through review and all that kind of stuff, they had their noses in the air and that kind of thing. But ironically, it was this white dude, Shakespeare scholar. His name is Dustin Stegner. He's now the chair of English, who helped me. It wasn't other faculty of color. He stood up and said, "This is wrong. You can't treat Jose this way." And he was vocal about it. And they hated him for it after that. But it took this student, right, to stand up for me. And he did. And I'm forever grateful. And he's one of my best friends now, because he stood up and did the right thing. And then when he did that, I put in and requested to move my tenure line from English to ethnic studies. I had to leave.
Yeah.
And so now I'm in ethnic studies. And now there's a new law in the state of California that requires every single Cal State student to take an ethnic studies class before they graduate, in order to graduate from the system. So we're growing. And now I'm hoping to lead that up, and things are changing slowly but surely at Cal Poly. We
Mhm.
still have the widest and the wealthiest student body of any university, public university in the state of California, but we're slowly changing that. So I've been trying to help do that work. And I talked to the president here at Cal Poly, and he's been fairly open to this change and committed to this change. And, they want slow change.
Yeah.
And as you know, being a person of color, that change can't come fast enough. But for them, they want slow, careful change. Right?
Yeah.
So that's what I've been up to since, doing my work, leading the department now, leading the implementation of this new state law on ethnic studies. And this is all, I think, good work. And I'm still committed to justice and still committed to making positive change.
Jose, I want to be mindful of our time. We're coming up on the hour, and so I know you've got things that you've got to take care of. And I wanted to know if we could bring you back and if we could
Sure.
do a second part, because I'm interested in exploring this, the work that you do, but also um, that your commitment to change and navigating that, and so yeah, I'd love to connect it to some of the work that I do, and conversations that I have with students um about their paths and whatnot. So
Sure.
can we bring you back for a second part?
Absolutely. Of course.
Okay.
And
Okay.
thank you for asking. I'm
Yeah.
honored. I mean,
No, 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 no. There's, you know, it's tough to get everything in an hour, and particularly when folks open up, and we've got there's so much to share, and I want to be able
mhm.
to go back and really delve into some of these things that you're talking about. So here's what we'll do. So this will conclude the first half, the first part of our conversation with Dr. Jose Navarro, and we'll come back and we'll do a second part. And
Sounds good.
so thank you, Jose. Thank you to our listeners out there. This concludes this episode of the Way to College podcast. Thank you to all of our listeners out there. Thank you to our guests. Please make sure you subscribe, rate, follow, all of that good stuff. And don't go too far because you've got to come back for that second part. All right. So we'll see you again soon. Thank you, and bye-bye.